I'd like to be able to garden without a clothespin on my nose. I also like to camp and enjoy Brushy Creek State Park, just south of town. It would be nice to swim in a lake without warning signs. Factory farms are popping up unchecked all over Iowa. The DNR, the Environmental Protection Commission, and the Republican-led, I repeat, the Republican-led legislature all turn a blind eye. What happened to Iowa nice? Abe Lincoln said, progress without empathy is not progress. A balance between corporate interests and rural communities to protect the environment needs to be made. Iowa has 750 impaired waterways already. Last Sunday's Des Moines Register reported that 40% out of 22,000 private wells tested positive for E. coli. Thomas Fuller said, you never know the worth of water till the well is dry. If the well is not dry, but you can't drink it, what's the difference? Bernie Sanders has been talking about climate change since the 80s. He cares about the environment, as everyone should, before it's too late. I believe in Bernie because he is consistent and true to the issues he believes in. He will bring the truth to you, Bernie Sanders, the next president of the United States.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Schmidt. I live over in Rockwell City. I've lived there my entire life. It's where I graduated, it's where I work, it's where I raised my 5-year-old daughter. It's my home, and I want it to be her home too. But like many small towns across America, we're facing challenges that seem impossible to overcome. What was once a bustling community has become a shell of its former self. Our town square used to be thriving with businesses, but now it's littered with empty, broken down buildings. Our school system has had to consolidate multiple times because we no longer have the population to sustain it. People have to drive out of town to find work that pays a living wage. Family farms once dotted the countryside, but now over 180 corporate-owned factory farms have replaced them. Donald Trump said that he would make America great again, but he sure hasn't done anything for my community or the thousands of communities like mine. I live in an area that feeds the world, yet it's a food desert for residents. I have to drive 50 miles round trip for affordable groceries. I work from home for an organization based out of Washington, D.C. because I couldn't find a use for my degree at a local employer. It's a 20-minute drive to the nearest hospital. 20 minutes that can mean life or death in an emergency situation. Our rural communities are struggling, and there is nothing great about it. When Bernie Sanders ran in 2016, he promised a political revolution. He promised to protect the voices of all of us in the face of a campaign finance system that has allowed the government to treat corporations and banks like a constituency. He promised us that each and every single American would have access to affordable health care through a Medicare for All system. He promised to take action to combat climate change and work towards making sure that our children have a chance at a livable future. Bernie has continued to fight for what is just and right in this world. With Bernie as president, we can make this political revolution a reality. We can have a country where everyone receives a living wage. We can have a country where education is not a life sentence of debt. We can have a country where rural communities thrive and rural families can stick around. That's the kind of America I want to live in. That's the kind of America I want to raise my child in. Bernie Sanders is our best bet. Bernie has the policies, the experience, and the grassroots support to rebuild our country to what it should be. We can become a nation where the American dream isn't reserved only for those at the top, where our elected officials answer to us, not the highest bidder, where everyone has a seat at the table. But we're gonna have to fight for it. We're gonna have to organize for it, And most importantly, we're gonna have to vote for it. So I hope you'll join me in doing just that. I hope you'll join me in supporting Bernie Sanders for President of the United States of America. All right, I have the distinct pleasure of announcing our next speaker. Y'all know Ben & Jerry's ice cream? I'm a little familiar with it myself. I've enjoyed a pint or two. Well, I am proud to announce that we have Ben Cohen here to talk next.
Hello, nice to be here on this incredibly beautiful day in Iowa. Driving over, we saw these beautiful, amazing wind farms. Congratulations on getting your electricity from the wind. You know, before Bernie, I used to be the most famous guy from Vermont. But I'm really happy to give up that mantle to Bernie because, you know, ice cream is good, but a president of the United States that truly believes in justice in all its flavors, that is euphoric. You know, euphoria is kind of a high-minded word, but the reason why Bernie will be able to transform Washington is that he's down to earth. He has a vision, and it's pretty simple. What would our country be like if it was really run for the benefit of regular, everyday people instead of huge corporations and the ultra-wealthy? And the thing about it is that he knows what he's up against. He has no delusions. He has 30 years of experience in the cesspool of what we call our political process in Washington today. And that's why he has the ability to flush the crap down the drain once we elect him president. You know, I'm not really a kind of guy who gets involved in electoral politics, but Bernie inspired me. I don't really see him as a politician in the normal sense of the word. He is a fighter for justice, economic, racial, and social. And he uses politics as a means to that end. You know, before Bernie, I never had a mayor that represented my values, or a congressman, or a senator. And I just can't tell you how good it feels to have somebody there in Washington who actually represents what you believe in. And so I would encourage you to work to do that and feel what it's like for you. I just want to give you a taste of what's gotten me so excited about seeing this guy in the White House. For the last 40 years, I've been Bernie's constituent. I've seen how steadfast and determined and committed he is. For the last 4 decades, he's worked consistently to improve the quality of life for regular people and those that are oppressed. In 1980, when Ben & Jerry's was first starting out in an old converted gas station, Bernie won an improbable victory and became mayor of Vermont. His first act was to shut down plans for building expensive condominiums that would have privatized the shore of Lake Champlain, and instead he turned it into a public park that was open to all. When he became my congressman, he personally took busloads of senior citizens over the border into Canada so that they could buy their prescription drugs at decent prices. And he co-founded the Progressive Caucus in the House, which has now become the largest values-based caucus. He voted against NAFTA before voting against NAFTA was cool. He voted against going to war in Iraq twice. Then, in 2007, he defeated the richest man in Vermont to become my senator. As senator, he worked with conservatives to force the first ever audit of the Federal Reserve Bank after the financial crash. And what it revealed was that there were $16 trillion in ultra-low interest loans and numerous conflicts of interest with Wall Street banks. Then he led a successful effort to stop the so-called chain CPI, which would have reduced Social Security benefits and also veterans benefits. And last September, Bernie introduced the Stop Bezos Act. That stands for Stop Bad Employers by Zeroing Out Subsidies. It requires large employers that are paying lousy wages to reimburse the federal government for the food stamp and Medicaid benefits that their employees need to get by. And a month later, Jeff Bezos, president of Amazon, raised the minimum wage of Amazon to $15 an hour. And just recently, it was in this highly polarized political atmosphere that Bernie was able to bring together Republicans and Democrats in Congress, in both the House and the Senate, to pass a resolution against the United States participating in the war in Yemen. When Bernie ran for president the first time, and he said he wouldn't take any big money, I thought it was a mistake. I thought there was no way he'd ever raise enough money to run a competitive campaign. And then I came to understand it. He realized that if there weren't enough people, hundreds of thousands of people, that were willing to donate small amounts of money, that he didn't want to become president. Because then he would never have the army of people that he needs to transform Washington once he gets into office. So, what do I think about Bernie, the man? Well, he's always been the same. Incredibly consistent and committed. He never wavers. He has a clear vision of how to make America kind again. And he continually comes up with innovative ways to do it. He's not a fancy guy. He's pretty down home. No airs. And I like his hairstyle. That never changes either. He doesn't go with the trends. He sets the trends. Small donor-funded campaigns, universal health care, publicly funded colleges and universities. Bernie, the trendsetter? Who knew? He's already leading the country. Just look at all the other candidates that are following. Thank you very much. And now it is my incredible, esteemed pleasure to introduce to you, ladies and gentlemen, the next President of the United States of America, Senator Bernie Sanders.
Sunshine let me thank Emma Schmidt for the great work that she has done, and Dave Haynes for his great work. And I want to say a word about Ben Cohen. I think many of you know that Ben, with his longtime friend Jerry Greenfield, they are the founders of Ben & Jerry's, which is an enormously successful company and also makes pretty good ice cream. But what you don't know about Ben is that he has kind of been a revolutionary businessman in showing the rest of the country that you can make a lot of money, and Ben & Jerry's makes a lot of money, but yet be a good corporate citizen. So they treat their workers with respect. If you go up to St. Albans, Vermont, you see a very contented workforce. People feel proud of the work. They're paid well. Supporting agriculture in the state of Vermont, and being an environmental champion. So what Ben is doing, and Ben & Jerry are doing, is showing the country that you can be a successful business person and have a conscience and do the right thing for your workers. So I want to thank Ben for that. What I want to do this tonight is say a few words about some recent developments in Washington that you may be familiar with. A couple of months ago, history was made in the House and the Senate, in that for the first time since the War Powers Act, if you guys are familiar with the War Powers Act that was passed 45 years ago, both the House and the Senate, I led the effort in the Senate, passed resolutions to get the United States out of a war that is unauthorized and unconstitutional, which is the war in Yemen led by Saudi Arabia. All right? And we won it with a strong bipartisan vote in the House and the Senate. Unfortunately, the president, despite his rhetoric about wanting to get out of endless wars, vetoed it. We did not have the votes to override that veto. But what is important is that, as all of you know, the Constitution of our country is pretty clear. It is not the president, Democrat or Republican, who has the power to send our troops into harm's way. It is the Congress. And for a very long time, under Democratic and Republican leadership, Congress has abdicated its responsibility, and now you are seeing in a bipartisan way. I worked with a very conservative Republican senator from Utah, Mike Lee. You are beginning to see Congress say, you know what, respect the Constitution, don't go to war unless it is authorized by the U.S. Congress. Barr to come before the House to talk about the Mueller report. He refused to come. And this is a very dangerous attack on our democratic institutions. That is the House's job, to provide oversight, to demand that the American people get answers, and I will support the House if they hold the Attorney General in contempt. He cannot. You know, I think the President, having met with his authoritarian friends in Russia, in Saudi Arabia, in North Korea, kind of thinks that our government is about one person running the show, and our job is to tell him that is not what American democracy is about. Our campaign is based on a couple of principles. And one of those principles is that we intend to run a government and run a campaign based on the principles of justice. And that means economic justice, it means social justice, it means racial justice, and it means environmental justice. approach toward American society is just a little bit different than Mr. Trump's. What he is trying to do in a way that literally is unprecedented in the modern history of this country is to try to divide the American people up rather than bring them together. And whether you have seen in the past conservative presidents or liberal or progressive presidents, a president understands that one of your foremost responsibilities is to make it clear that whether you're black or whether you're white or whether you're native born or whether you're an immigrant, whether you're gay, whether you're straight, whether you're Christian or Jewish or Muslim, whatever you may be, you are American and we are all in this together. This president, and it disturbs me very much, we can have honest disagreements on health care. We'll talk about that tonight. Disagreements on the budget, disagreements on the environment. That's part of American democracy. But really, it is not part of American democracy to try to win votes by dividing the American people up. That is demagoguery. That is not democracy. And, when we talk about economic justice, let me raise some issues a lot of candidates do not talk about. And that is the issue of wealth and income inequality. And one of my great fears as a United States Senator and as a candidate for president is this country is moving rapidly in the direction of becoming an oligarchic society. You all know what oligarchy means, right? And what we are seeing today, and I want you to hear this because you're not going to see it much on TV. It's not talked about in the media much, not talked about at all in Congress. Very few people talk about it. We have to deal with the reality that today you got 3 families that own more wealth than the bottom 50% of the American people. 3 families.
That ain't right.
That ain't right. You got the top 1% owning more wealth than the bottom 92%. And at a time where here in Iowa and in Vermont and all over this country, you got people working 2 or 3 jobs to pay the bills, to get the health care their family needs. 49% of all new income is going to the top 1%. And our job is to create an economy that works for all of us, not just the people on top. Because that kind of unfair distribution of wealth, by the way, has not existed since the 1920s and is worse than almost any other major country on earth. That is not what America should be about. But then you have not only massive levels of income and wealth inequality, such that, I don't want to throw out too many facts here to bore you, but the average worker today in America is making about 5 cents an hour more in real dollars than that man or woman made 43 years ago. You got that? So you know why people are angry? Why are they angry? They're angry, they're working like crazy. They're worried about their kids having a lower standard of living than they will, and they're going nowhere in a hurry, and they have seen a massive transfer of wealth over the last 40, 45 years from the middle class and working families to the top 1%. If we had the same distribution of wealth, of income, today as we had 43 years ago, the average American family would have $11,000 a year more in income. So what our job is to stop this trend of seeing income going from the middle class and working class to the 1% and turn that around and create an economy that works for working families. I get around my own state of Vermont, and I hope you'll all come and visit us. We're a beautiful state like yours. And there are many similarities, because both states have a lot of hard-working people who are struggling. But what you all should know that today, despite the so-called good economy that Trump will be boasting about, half of the American people are living paycheck to paycheck. You all know what that means, paycheck to paycheck? I grew up in a family. I know a little bit about that because I grew up in a family who lives paycheck to paycheck. And what it means, think about what it means. What it means is that people are living in great stress. I go all over the country and I see the stress on people's faces. And they're worrying, how am I going to get through the week? What happens if my kid gets sick and I run up a $300 doctor bill? You know what, if I do that, I can't pay for the lights. If I can't pay for the lights, how do I have my house? If my car breaks down, how do I get to work? If I can't get to work, I get fired. If I get fired, how do I take care of my kids? We are a nation living under enormous economic stress. You got 40% of older workers who have nothing saved up for retirement. So they're getting to be 55, 60, 65 years of age, and they're worried about how they're going to make it in their retirement years. That's the kind of stress that people are living under, and that is one of the reasons why, in an unprecedented manner, life expectancy in America is actually in decline. Did you all know that? For the last 3 years, people are living shorter lives. Think about that. You got all kinds of breakthroughs in medicine, etc., all over the world. Life expectancy is going up. In America, it is going down. And one of the reasons that it is going down is a phenomenon that doctors call diseases of despair. And that is because when people, especially in rural areas, give up, when you're a family farmer, you're going to be driven off the land that your family has owned for generations. What ends up happening is people turn to drugs to try to ease the pain. They turn to alcohol, and in increasing numbers, they turn to suicide. And those are the reasons why life expectancy is going down in America, because so many people have lost hope in the future, and they are scared to death about what happens to their kids, who, if we do not turn this around, will actually have a lower standard of living than they do. So what we want to do is create an economy that works in a just and fair way for all people. And we want to create a political system that is based on the principles that we all should hold dear. And that is one person, one vote. Now, in my state, every March, we have what we call town meetings. Do you have town meetings here? No, I think you don't. And we have town meetings with small towns, like this town, get together, and people vote on the budget, they vote on how much they want to spend on the schools, on the roads, etc. People stand up, they argue about the budget, they get one person, one vote. In America today, we are rapidly moving toward a political system in which, number one, billionaires, because of this disastrous Citizens United Supreme Court decision, are able to spend hundreds of millions of dollars to elect candidates who represent the wealthy and the powerful. Can you believe that? So you have a political system where the Koch brothers and a few other billionaires can buy the airwaves to elect candidates who represent their interests. And that is why, among many other things, we have got to overturn this disastrous Citizens United Supreme Court decision. So we want a just economy, and we want democracy to be one person, one vote. And while I'm on that subject of democracy, it bothers me immensely. It really does. I have run in elections where I have lost. I've run in elections where I have won. But it has never, ever occurred to me, and I think most candidates, to figure out a way to make it difficult for people to vote because they might vote against me. We have parts of the state where I'm very strong, parts of the state where I'm less strong. But it's never occurred to me to say, hey, how do we make it harder for people in those areas of the state that might vote against me? How do I make it harder for them to vote? But all over this country right now, in an outrageous way, you have cowardly Republican governors who are working overtime to suppress the vote, to make it harder for young people, poor people, people of color to vote. And what I say to those cowardly Republican governors is, if you don't have the guts to participate in free and fair elections, get out of politics and get another job. And this is an issue that should bother every single American. I don't care what your politics are. But if you believe in your politics, if you are a conservative, and there are many decent conservatives who get up and try to, they give their point of view, and that's called democracy, and they're progressive. We will argue it out. But we don't and should not make it harder for people to vote. I was just in New Hampshire last week. They passed legislation which make it much harder for young people to vote. In Tennessee right now, they're discouraging people to do voter registration. And in many southern states, of course, they're making it difficult for people of color to participate. So my view is, and as president, this is what I would implement. If you are 18 years of age and a citizen of the United States of America, you have the right to vote. End of discussion. I want to say a word to you in Iowa, a special thanks. I think all of you know and take seriously the fact that you are the first caucus that takes place in the presidential process. And I've been deeply impressed, really have, by the seriousness upon which the people of Iowa accept that important responsibility. And I know people go to hear many, many candidates, they talk to candidates, they try to get their sense of which candidate they want to support. But what I want to say from a personal perspective is I came to Iowa 4 years ago. And I think it's fair to say relatively few people in Iowa knew who the junior senator from the state of Vermont was. In fact, some people did not know what the state of Vermont was, but somewhere up north, near Canada. And anyhow, we started the campaign at 3 or 4% in the polls. And we went around the state. I don't know, I can't compare what I've done to other candidates, but we worked and will work this campaign very hard. We ended up doing 112 events, exactly like this one. Some larger in the bigger cities, some smaller. And we ended up speaking, as I recall, to some 73,000 people in Iowa in meetings exactly like this, which is the way I like to do politics. This is what I enjoy. And when we came to Iowa, the criticism that I received, to the degree that anybody paid attention, was that the ideas that we brought forth were too extreme, were too radical, too crazy, and would not be supported by the people of Iowa or by anybody else. And then what happened is, after we spoke to 73,000 people, did 112 meetings, it turns out that on caucus night in Iowa, we won 50% of the vote, and half of the vote, which is something that nobody thought could happen. And the importance of that is not just to thank you for that, and it enabled us to go on to New Hampshire and win that state by a good victory and end up winning 22 states, 13 million votes, and 1,700 delegates to the Democratic National Convention. But the point that I want to make is that what Iowa showed the entire country is that the ideas that we brought forth were not radical, extreme ideas, but were ideas that made sense to a very common sense state. And let me give you some examples of what I mean by that and the progress that we have made. 4 years ago, we came into Iowa and we said that if you work 40 hours a week, you should not be living in poverty. Now, I've gone around the state and I have talked to many, many people. I just did a forum yesterday with a woman with 2 kids she works at Dunkin' Donuts. She makes $11 an hour. She's spending 50% of her limited income on housing. And I've talked to a number of people in Iowa in that position. This is the wealthiest country in the history of the world. And if people are working 40 hours a week, they should not be living in poverty, because we must raise the minimum wage to a living wage of $15 an hour. And when I talked about that 4 years ago, it seemed like a pretty radical idea. Some of you may remember, Bernie wants to more than double the federal minimum wage. That's double the minimum wage here in the state of Iowa. It's too radical. It's too crazy. Maybe we can go to $8 an hour, $9, $10 an hour, 15, too radical. I want to tell you, and it started here in Iowa, that since that campaign, 6 states in the country have passed legislation raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. And unless I am very mistaken, and I don't think I am, the United States House of Representatives is going to pass legislation in a month or two raising the minimum wage nationally to $15 an hour. And when they do that, that bill is going to come to the Senate. And I beg of you to tell your senators, Senator Ernst, Senator Grassley, tell them that people cannot live on $10 or less an hour. Tell them to join us in raising that federal minimum wage to $15 an hour. And when we talk about wages, we have got to end the absurdity of women making 80 cents on the dollar compared to men. I think the women and the men think that women are deserving of the whole buck, not 80 cents. And we got to move in that direction. And we also have to make it easier for workers to join unions, not harder. And we have legislation in that will do that. 4 years ago when I was here, I said, in America today, our infrastructure, our roads, our bridges, our water systems sound like a problem in Iowa? Yeah. Our wastewater plants, our rail system is in many ways crumbling, inadequate. And I proposed an investment of $1 trillion over 10 years, which would create up to 15 million jobs to rebuild our infrastructure. And by the way, when I talk about infrastructure, I'm also talking about affordable housing. Yes. We need to build affordable housing. Well, that idea is also $1 trillion. Oh my God, can't do that. Well, I got to tell you, I'm now on the concern. We're going to raise that number because everybody thinks that's too small now. But we've come a long way in raising consciousness about the need to rebuild our crumbling infrastructure. 4 years ago, I said that it does not make sense or is not fair for elderly people in Vermont and in Iowa to be living on $12,000 or $13,000 a year Social Security. How can somebody who is 85 years of age make it on $12,000, $13,000? And the answer is they can't. And that's about 20% of the senior citizens in this country. My Republican colleagues want to cut Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid. We're not going to let them do that. In fact, we are going to expand Social Security benefits by lifting the cap on taxable income. Four years ago, I was in a national debate, television debate, and the moderator said, okay, candidates, tell us what you think the major national security crisis facing the country is. And I think people expected me to say Al-Qaeda, ISIS, which are very important threats to our country. I said the greatest threat actually is climate change. And the moderators literally laughed. They laughed. Well, people are not laughing today because they understand that the scientific community tells us not just that climate change is real, not just that it's causing devastating problems right now, but that it is caused by human activity. And if we do not transform our energy system big time, immediately, before the next 12 years, there will be irreparable damage done to our planet. Irreparable damage. So what I believe is that we must summon up the courage to take on the fossil fuel industry and tell them that their short-term profits are not more important than the future of our planet. And in that regard, I want to congratulate the people of Iowa. I know that President Trump, after deep research, has concluded, because you know he is, to quote the president, a stable genius, end of quote. He has determined that wind turbines cause cancer. And this is kind of interesting. He's the only person in the world who has come to that conclusion. But in any case, as you know, Iowa gets about 35% of its electricity from wind turbines, and I congratulate you for that. And what we have got to do is not only move aggressively to energy efficiency, we have got to also invest heavily in wind, in solar, and in other sustainable energies. What is at stake here? You know, and I use the word, I'm not quite sure what existential means. It's a big word, and I use it occasionally. I'm not quite sure what it means, but it sounds pretty ominous. But what it does mean, when we talk about an existential threat to the planet, it means that I got 4 kids and 7 very beautiful grandchildren, all right? And you have kids and grandchildren as well. And we have a moral responsibility to leave this planet in a way that is healthy and habitable to future generations. You know? This is an issue, this is not an issue where there's, well, maybe this or maybe that. We have got to act aggressively to save the planet. That is our responsibility. I don't want to be in a position, and I don't want you to be in a position. 20, 30 years ago, kids say to you, hey, you were alive then. What did you do to prevent the disaster that we are living with right now? And that's what the scientists are telling us we're facing in terms of more drought, more flooding, more extreme weather disturbances, more rising sea levels, more acidification of this ocean. We are facing an ominous future, but we have the technology and we have the wisdom to turn this around. This is a political issue, not a technology issue. We know what we have to do and we can do it. And by the way, the silver lining in all of this may be, you know, when you think about history, you think about the trillions of dollars that countries have spent killing each other in terrible, terrible wars and money on weapons of destruction, maybe, just maybe, under good leadership, and I would very much like to provide that leadership. Think about a world in which we bring China and Russia and India and Latin America and Africa together, because every single country on earth is being threatened by climate change. And wouldn't it be extraordinary, instead of investing in weapons of destruction and figuring out ways that we kill each other, that we bring the world together to fight a common enemy called climate change. Four years ago, we said that maybe with massive levels of income and wealth inequality, which have only gotten worse over the last 4 years, maybe instead of giving tax breaks to the wealthy and large corporations, we should demand that they start paying their fair share of taxes. You know, I am criticized very often by establishment media, by my political opponents, by Republicans. They say, Bernie is such a nice guy, he wants to do this and he wants to do that, how's he going to pay for it? Well, maybe some of those people might ask, how does it happen that a company like Amazon that made 11 billion profits last year, owned by the wealthiest person in this country, did not pay a nickel in federal income tax? Maybe we should ask that question. So to the people who own Amazon and the dozens of other large corporations that have received huge tax breaks under Trump's tax plan, we got some bad news for you. And that is we are going to rescind those tax breaks and invest them in the middle class and working class of this country. We have today a criminal justice system which is severely broken. And I want you just to think for a moment, how does it happen? Just think about it. That in the United States of America today, we have more people in jail, over 2 million people, than any other country on earth. China is a communist authoritarian country that does not tolerate dissent terribly well. We have more people in jail than China. We are spending $80 billion at the local, state, and federal level to lock people up. All right. What I believe, and I'm proud that we have made in recent years some good progress. A few years ago, there were a handful of organizations. Black Lives Matter was one, the ACLU was another, and a few others, that were talking about this broken criminal justice system. But over the years, we're beginning to make some real progress. Let me just tell you what I think we have got to do. I think we have got to invest in our young people, in job training and in education. There are kids all over this country, in Vermont, I'm sure in Iowa, and all over America, who are falling through the cracks. These kids are going to drop out of school. They're going to end up on street corners without the job skills or the education to get a decent job in this economy. And it makes a lot more sense to me to invest in those kids in job training and in education than in more jails and more incarceration. Further, we need to end private prisons and private detention centers. Corporations should not be making money locking up Americans. Thirdly, and maybe most importantly, and I want to say, maybe it started here in Iowa again, where we have made real progress, and that is ending the so-called war on drugs. What does that mean? What does that mean? It means that over a period of time, a long period of time, millions of people have received criminal records for possession of marijuana. And the racial bias is very clear, because whites and blacks do marijuana at about the same level, but blacks end up getting arrested 5 times more. All right? And then if you get a criminal record, let's say you're 19 years of age, you got a criminal record and you go in looking for a job, and your employer says, well, tell me about your past. Do you have any criminal record? Well, yes, I do. The likelihood is you may not get that job. And if you don't get that job, you're going to end up out on the street. You're going to end up out on the street. You're going to get into trouble. And the cycle continues. All right? I am very proud to tell you what you already know is that state after state in the last few years is not only moving toward the decriminalization of marijuana, but toward the legalization of marijuana, and I think that's a step in the right direction. And also, what we are seeing is actually some communities expunging criminal records of those people who were arrested for possession of marijuana. Let me tell you something else. And I have to tell you the truth that I did not know about this until a few years ago. Should have known about it. I'm a senator, I should have known about it. Today, we got about 2 million people in jail. About 400,000 of those people, about 20%, are in jail having been convicted of nothing. Why are they in jail? Anybody know? That's right. They are in jail for the crime of being poor and not being able to afford cash bail. They can't come up with the $500 they need to get out of jail. It is unbelievable when you think about it that in the United States of America we still have what amounts to debtor's prison. People are in jail because they are poor. So if elected, we are going to get rid of that whole cash bail system. And there is another issue that we have got to deal with, and that is to understand that with some 10 million undocumented people in this country today, what we should be doing is not demonizing those people in a demagogic way, which is what Trump is doing, but we should be moving toward comprehensive immigration reform and a path toward citizenship. That means, among other things, providing immediate legal status to the 1.8 million young people in the DACA program, and it means developing a humane policy at the border for those people who are seeking asylum. America must never be the country that snatches babies from the arms of their mothers. Let me just talk about some of what I think has to happen for us to do what this country needs. And I want to tell you very honestly that the decision to run for president was something that my wife and I anguished over month after month. We've never had to deal, other than very personal stuff, with an issue like that. One day we said we should do it, the next day we said we should not do it. We argued about it. But at the end of the day, we decided that we should do it for two reasons. And one is that it goes without saying, and I would not be here tonight if it were otherwise, we're running to win the Democratic primary, obviously. Second thing, obviously, we, if nominated, will defeat the worst president in the modern history of this country. And you're going to hear a lot of folks, our political opponents, say, oh, Bernie can't beat Trump. But I would suggest take a look at virtually every poll that has ever been done, including a couple of weeks ago we did three. There were three polls that came out in battleground states. We didn't poll Iowa. We did Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. And we beat Trump 9, 10, and 11% in those three states. So I think, but it's you know, what Jane and I concluded, it's not just, you know, being president of the United States, I have to admit, is pretty cool. White House is a nice place. Big garden, my grandchildren would enjoy it very much. But I'm running for not just to be president for the sake of being president. I would not be running unless I thought it absolutely imperative that we transform this country. That we create a government and an economy that works for all of us and not just wealthy campaign contributors. And the message of our campaign, you may have seen, you know, we have, I don't know what we got, bumper stickers and stuff out there. It says, us, not me. See that? Anybody knows what do I mean by, and this is not just a bumper sticker. This is something that I believe from the bottom of my heart. Why are we saying that? Who has some thoughts on that, ma'am? Stand up, say that again, that's right.
Well, we need all of us to work together in order to get the change that we need. It can't be done just by the president.
Exactly. All right. So let me say two things. Number one, I know many of the people who are competing in the Democratic primary. Some of them I know for 25 years, and almost without exception, they are good, honest, decent people. So the first thing I want you all to know, and I'm going to respond to your point, is that what we all know, we're going to compete, you know, kind of, you know, in a very aggressive way, I'm sure, on the issues. But I hope very much that there are no personal attacks, that we develop the issues, and you have to make your choices that we support. But I can tell you that, without exception, many of these Democratic candidates are good people. But the second point that I will tell you, which I think other candidates may not, is just what this woman said. What is your name, ma'am? Chris? What Chris said. She hit the nail on that. Here's the fact. And again, you're not going to see this on TV. Is most candidates say, elect me, and I will do A, B, and C. Well, I've talked about some of my agenda, and I'll talk about more. But what I'm telling you is, if you elect me, I cannot do it alone. Why is that? Because the powers that be in this country are so strong, have so much money, have so much clout, that no president, no matter how well-intentioned or honest he or she may be, can do it alone. Wall Street, and I want to just mention this thing, all right? Not talked about very much. 6 largest financial institutions in this country have assets equivalent to 54% of the GDP of the United States of America. 6 banks control the flow of trillions and trillions of dollars. It is not that the government regulates Wall Street, it is that Wall Street regulates the government. So at a time when Wall Street firms are making huge amounts of money, you know what interest rates you're paying on your credit card? Anyone know? You're paying, on average, 17%. If you buy a product in a store and you're paying it off, you're paying 26% on money that Wall Street borrows for 2.5%. Now we're going to introduce, and I hope pass, legislation to lower those interest rates. but the power of Wall Street is extraordinary. Then you take a look at the pharmaceutical industry. Right now, you walk into your pharmacy tomorrow to renew a prescription and you find that the price of your medicine has doubled. And that's what the drug companies do because they can do it and there is no law to stop it. So what you should know is that the 10 largest drug companies last year made $69 billion in profit, and 1 out of 5 Americans cannot afford to fill the prescriptions their doctors write because we pay almost double what any other country on earth pays for prescription drugs. I know the pharmaceutical industry. I have dealt with them. They have endless amounts of money and incredible power. An example, people in California a few years ago wanted to pass a modest effort to control drug prices in California. The industry spent $131 million in one state to defeat one ballot item. They have endless amounts of money. So no president is going to go in there and say, hey, drug companies, be nice guys, stop ripping off the American people. And it's the same thing with the insurance companies. The insurance companies right now, working with the drug companies, are going to spend endless amounts of money. You will see the ads here pretty soon, I expect, here in Iowa, telling you how terrible Bernie is and how terrible Medicare for All is, and it's going to be terrible. But understand that the insurance companies every year make billions of dollars in profit. You guys know United Healthcare, right? Played a role here. You don't know that the head of United Health Insurance last year made $83 million in compensation. You may not know that the head of Aetna put together a merger with CVS drugstores, which will raise healthcare costs in America. You know how much he got for his merger efforts in the bonus? He got $500 million. Well, I think those types of guys are not particularly sympathetic with a Medicare for all healthcare system whose function is to provide healthcare to every man, woman, and child in a cost-effective way and not make the CEOs of the drug companies and the insurance companies incredibly rich. So when we talk about us, not me, what we are talking about is, in fact, a political revolution which gets the establishment somewhat nervous. They're very content where they are. Drug companies are doing great. Insurance companies are doing great. Wall Street is doing great. Military-industrial complex is doing phenomenally well. Trump has given them all kinds of money. We now spend more than the next 10 countries combined. Fossil fuel industry is doing just great, helping to destroy the planet. Top 1% are getting much richer. And what our campaign is about, and why it is a threat to all of them, is that we are saying loudly and clearly, enough is enough. To get back to Chris's point about why all of us need to be involved, anybody here who knows anything about American history understands that the real significant changes that have taken place in America have never come from on top, but always from down below. That's just the way history is. The leaders follow and the people lead. So you just think about American history 100, 150 years ago, when you had workers employed in factories working 15 hours a day. They could be fired arbitrarily. Their hands were getting cut off. You had children working in factories. You had children working in the fields. Workers had no power at all. And with great courage, what they said is that we are human beings. We may be working people. We may be poor people, but we are human beings and not animals. And we're going to come together and we're going to form unions to collectively negotiate contracts and to get people. And workers have to fight for that. Nobody gave it to them. And as a result of the union movement, we have now the middle class in America. And I want you to think about the civil rights movement. It wasn't Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who was one of the great leaders, and is an inspiration to me personally, one of the great leaders in American history. It wasn't that Dr. King himself created the civil rights movement. He would be the first person to acknowledge that. What happened is that millions of people, black and white, stood up and said, you know what? We are going to do everything we can to end racism. We're going to end segregation in America. Not so many years ago. Young people don't know this. You know, in states of the South, blacks can go into a movie theater, can go into a school. We're going to end that. And we are going to get the right to vote. Took a great struggle until finally President Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act. That did not come from on top. It came from millions of people standing up for justice. 100 plus a few years ago, women in America did not have the right to vote. You know, that's such a long time ago from an historical perspective. Women did not have the right to vote. Women could not get the education that they wanted. Women, if there was a divorce, did not get a fair shake, to say the least. But women said, you know what, this is America. We will not be second-class citizens. And the suffragettes and their male allies stood together and said that in America, we are going to end the kind of discrimination that exists against women. And obviously, we still have a long way to go in that regard. But no one can deny that because of women standing up and fighting back, we have made progress. I don't want to say a word on that issue, because it applies right here to Iowa. I get sick and tired when we hear about women's rights. Sick and tired of hearing my conservative colleagues in the Congress tell us that they hate big government. You ever hear them talk about hate big government? Get the government off the backs of the American people. Except if the American people are women who want to control their own bodies. So I understand that in this state, there are strong differences of opinion about abortion. And all that I am saying is people are entitled to their views, but the government is not entitled to tell every woman what she can or cannot do with her body. That's her choice. When we talk about struggle, I'm old enough to remember this, and that is 30, 40 years ago, if you were gay in America, you kept that to yourselves. And think, as a result of, with great courage, people standing up and marching and saying, we will love the people we want regardless of their gender. And these people were beaten and humiliated and intimidated, but they continued fighting. And we passed, obviously, gay marriage. We have made enormous progress because at the grassroots level, and by the way, I mean, this is how change takes place. You go out and you ask the young people about gay marriage, it's almost a non-issue anymore. All right, it's become accepted. What's the big deal about it? Trust me, I was there in Vermont. Vermont actually was the first state to help lead in this effort. I was there marching in the parades and heard what people on the sidelines, the ugly statements that people were making. But things change because people stand up and fight back. So here's where we are today. Here's where we are today. We are a nation with massive levels of income and wealth inequality. We are a nation in which working families here in Iowa cannot find quality, affordable child care for their kids. We are a nation in which teachers are not respected and not paid well. And I want to applaud all of the teachers all over this country, including most recently in South Carolina and North Carolina, who had the guts to go out on the streets and protest to demand decent education for their kids. We are a nation in which today hundreds of thousands of bright young kids cannot afford to go to college because their families don't have the money. We are a nation in which millions of people have graduated college $50,000, $100,000 in debt. And we just were in a meeting earlier today where a family was talking about they're going to be paying off that debt for decades, okay? Which is why I believe we have got to make public colleges and universities tuition free and substantially reduce student debt in this country. We are a nation in which our infrastructure is in horrendous shape, where people turn on their faucet and the water that comes out is not drinkable. We are a nation in which too many elderly people are living in poverty, and older workers are scared to death about retirement, and on it goes. Now, if we were a poor nation, we could say that's the way it is. Yeah, we'd like to have health care for all of our people as a right, but we're too poor. We can't educate people to become doctors and nurses. We can't do it. We're too poor. We are not too poor. What we have is a system in which a handful of people have much too much wealth, much too much income, and much too much power. And what this campaign is about is taking those people on frontally. So let me just conclude by saying this. I obviously need your help to win the caucus here in Iowa, and I'm asking for your help. If we win the Democratic primary, I'm going to need your help big time. I think we can defeat Trump in Iowa, and I'll tell you why. I think that the people of Iowa and many other states that voted for Trump are catching on that a lot of what Trump campaigned on, what he said, turned out to be a lie. You remember during the campaign, Trump was here in Iowa and he said it's going to provide health care to everybody. Remember that? Well, it was a lie. He worked overtime to try to throw 32 million people off of health care. We ended up preventing that from happening by one vote, the late John McCain. That was it. Trump said he was a different type of Republican. He would not cut Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. Take a look at his budget. $1.5 trillion cut over a 10-year period of Medicaid, significant cuts to Medicare, and some cuts to Social Security as well. Trump said that his tax plan would not benefit the wealthy. Well, that was a lie. 83% of the benefits went to the top 1%. Trump said he would stand up to Wall Street and the establishment. He brought more billionaires and Wall Street executives into his administration than any president in history. So what I am asking from you tonight is a big ask. It really is. And some of you may say, well, you know, maybe I don't want to do it. I understand that. So I'm asking for your help to win the primary. I'm asking for your help if we win the nomination to defeat Trump. But I'm asking something else from you. And that is for the sake of our kids and our grandchildren. I'm asking you to be with me if I win the presidency in the fight to take on incredibly powerful special interests. Because it is about us, not me. I cannot do it alone. So our job is to have millions of people begin to stand up, to understand that health care is a human right, not a privilege, to understand that we're not going to continue to have the highest rate of childhood poverty in almost any country on earth, massive income and wealth inequality, that we can do much better. But the only way we do better is when millions of people stand up and fight back. And that tonight is what I'm asking you to work with me on. Thank you all very much. But I'd love to take any questions or comments that anybody may have. Okay, yes ma'am, right there. Stand up. We have a mic for her. Tell us your name. And
Hi, thanks for taking my question. My name is Sarah, and I wanted to ask you about something that I find really terrifying, and I think a lot of people do too, and that's the state of our courts right now. I'm a survivor of sexual violence. I'm one of those who traveled to Washington, D.C. because I knew that we needed to make our voices heard and speak out against the Kavanaugh confirmation. And I think that that process is bad, not just because he's immoral, immoral. It was an immoral choice to fill the court because he's wholly unqualified. And it's not just Kavanaugh. We see that Trump is stacking the courts with these right-wing ideologues, and it's going largely unnoticed. And it's basically the Heritage Foundation,
Yes.
Federalist Society,
That's
who are
right.
picking the people who are threatening communities of color, women, the LGBTQIA community, and unions.
Yes.
And it's a huge problem, and I think that down the road it's going to make a lot of our communities unsafe. So what I want to know is, what is your position? Would you be open to reforming the size and the makeup of the Supreme Court to restore the legitimacy and integrity to our court system?
Well, I think the proper word, Sarah, that you're asking is packing the court. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. I think no. And the reason for that, as tempting as it is, and I agree with everything you said, is that as much disrespect as the court has now, if you started adding 2 progressives to the court to give us, say, a 6-5 vote, Republicans come back next time, they're going to make it a 7-6. But what I think we can do is a couple of things. I think we can figure out a way to rotate Supreme Court justices down to the appeals court, which would, I think, have some positive impact, and I'd be open to that. You raise a profound question. What Sarah is saying, I'm in the Senate, so I see it every day, is all that Mitch McConnell is doing now is rushing through judges, most of them really right-wing judges. Not all, but most of them are. And by the way, Chuck Grassley is chairman of the Judiciary Committee. He could be of help on this issue. But it is a problem, and there are ways to fight back, but I think I am not in favor of packing the court. Okay. Yeah, right, yes.
Hello, Senator. Thank you for coming. My question for you is, what is your strategy for uniting the country after Trump?
Good. All right, here's the good news. Thank you for that question. And it is very good news. The media will tell you that we are a very, very divided country. And in some areas we are. On the issue of abortion, I will not deny that this country is divided. Although, by the way, most Americans, by a pretty good number, do not believe we should overturn Roe versus Wade. You should understand that. Okay? Guns are an issue where there is a division. But to answer your question, it turns out that on issue after issue, a strong majority of the American people are in agreement. Should we raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour? You know what? American people say yes. Should health care be seen as a right and not a privilege? People will disagree about the means to get there, but very few people think it's okay that we pay far more than any other country for health care. We got 34 million people uninsured and even more underinsured. We have the people on our side in terms of real health care reform. Most people do not believe that women should make 80 cents on the dollar compared to men. People believe we should rebuild our infrastructure. People, especially young people, believe that climate change is a real threat to this country. Go out, don't take my word for it. Go out into the conservative parts of this state. I don't even know, is this a conservative part of the state? I don't even know that. But go out and ask people whether they think we should give tax breaks to billionaires and then cut Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. And you know what? Whether they're right-wing people or they're left-wing people, very few people will tell you yes. So what is my point? My point is you bring the American people together by saying, look, yeah, we're going to have differences on issues. That's kind of natural. My wife and I disagree on issues. But on virtually all of the major economic issues facing this country, we are all on the same side. People in Iowa and the people in Vermont do not believe we should have trade policies which allow corporations to throw American workers out on the street and hire people abroad at 50 cents or $2 an hour, okay? So you build on the issues that we have in common. You do exactly the opposite that Trump is trying to do. Trump is trying to divide us up by our sexual orientation, by the country we came from, by the color of our skin, by our religion. And we say we're all in it together. We all have kids. We all are looking forward to a better life for our children. Let us stand together on the issues that we have where we hold common views. Yeah, woman right back there. Yeah.
You had mentioned prison reform.
Yes.
So what is your thoughts on capital punishment?
I'm opposed to capital punishment.
You're opposed to
I
it?
am. And I understand there are people who disagree, but this is what I think. I think there are people who commit heinous crimes, and everybody is disgusted and angry and hateful at people who do terrible things to children or just do, terrible things in general. But I think we have got to be better than those murderers, and I think that the state itself should not be involved in killing people. And I think that, and this is not just my idea, this is what in fact exists in most countries around the world right now. And I think you're seeing in California, I think they have put a call to capital punishment. So, I mean, I understand that that's an issue that people will disagree with me on, but that is my view. Okay, other, yeah, sir? Yeah, the mic is coming to you.
Senator Saunders, thank you for taking my question. You indicated that you are for the ACA, and it doesn't work. And it doesn't work because last year my wife was covered by it. I happen to be over 65, so I was covered by Medicare. My wife was 63 last year, so she had no options other than to go to ACA. We spent $18,000 on medical bills last year and received not one penny back from the ACA whatsoever. We spent over $12,000, over $1,000 a month for premiums, and another $6,000 in medical bills and got not one penny back.
Okay.
That's not working.
Okay. Now, what I said.
But it is, sir. One more point.
Sure.
It's a catastrophic insurance.
Okay. Okay.
It's not insurance.
Okay. You are on Social Security. You're on Medicare, right?
I'm on Medicare.
And your wife is not.
She is not.
Would you like us to expand Medicare to cover your wife?
No.
Why?
The reason why is because I know what's going to happen when that happens is people are going to pay all through their lives up to 65 or 70% of the money. The money will not come when you run out of rich people. Who are you going to tax?
All right, I got it. You're watching Fox TV.
No.
I don't mean to be. I don't mean to be. Look, you're entitled to your view, and I respect your point of view. All right, but and I do. Thank you. Okay, and that's the point. I mean, we can disagree on an issue, but not be disrespectful to each other. And I thank you for coming. But let me just speak to the gentleman's point. In my view, our current healthcare system is dysfunctional. You gave us an example of how it is dysfunctional. The other reason it is dysfunctional is that we pay the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs because the drug companies can charge us any price they want to pay. The other reason it is dysfunctional is that even if you have health insurance, and you gave us an example of that, if you have a high deductible and a high copayment, you still can't go to the doctor when you should because the deductible and the copayment is too high. It is dysfunctional because when you submit your claim to the insurance companies, they will work overtime to deny that claim. All right? Every other major country on earth guarantees health care to all people as a right. Okay? And they do it for significantly less cost per person. We are now spending in this country $11,000 for every man, woman, and child on health care. Family of four. If there's any person here who is independently employed, family of four, you're spending on average $28,000 a year. So when you get rid of the profiteering of the insurance companies and the drug companies, and when you get rid of all of the administrative waste that exists in terms of billing, you got zillions of people out there billing you, driving you crazy when you submit a claim. And when you have a simple system, which other countries have, you're going to save substantial sums of money and cover every man, woman, and child. That is my view. I respect that you disagree with it, but that is my view. Okay, one other question. Who we got? Okay, gentleman right here.
Thanks for being here. My name is Jeremy. My question is regarding climate change. You mentioned, I don't like the word existential either because I don't think people always know what it means. Like, climate change is the end of our civilization if nothing is done. So
thank you very much. This is going to be the last question, and thank you for asking that. What I pledge to you tonight is that I do regard climate change is a major, major threat to the future of our planet. I mean, I can't think of an issue that is more significant for my kids and my grandchildren. And we have got to do everything that we can to transform our energy system away from fossil fuel to energy efficiency and sustainable energy, while at the same time understanding that workers in the fossil fuel industry are not our enemies. They're just trying to make a living, all right? But we've got to hold them harmless, and we can do that. But at the end of the day, I will do everything I can, not only in this country, because it's not, we can do all the great things, but if China and Russia and India are not doing similar things, the future of the planet is at stake. So this is an issue. We need international cooperation, and I, as president, will help lead that effort. Thank you all very much.